Okay, so this is my discussion on the Time for Schools video part one. This video basically just covered the education of 4 students in different parts of the world. It covered Afghanistan, Rio, India, and Japan. A couple of points that were made at the beginning that I thought were worth mentioning was it talks about that all kids have dreams, but they need some sort of education to achieve these dreams. And so that was kind of the focus of creating an education system that works really well to get all these kids to schools and to receive an education. It also kind of mentioned that at adolescence is when kids are most at risk to drop out of school. So I was kind of trying to listen through that to see why that is. And the biggest reason I found was that, especially in other countries, their culture is to come home and do work for the family, to provide for the family, to do chores, and this causes them to put their education kind of on the back burner, and it makes it harder to keep up their studies, so they have to drop out and just kind of forget about it. One other thing that I thought was worth mentioning was that 1/3 of the world's kids aren't in school, and they're mostly girls. I thought that was interesting, considering, especially in the U.S., how much we focus on just equality and human rights for men and women. That in the rest of the world, that is still a major issue that needs to be sorted out. Let's see. So in Afghanistan, they talked about that the big problem there was the Taliban, and how they were constantly under threat from the Taliban and constantly worrying that their school was going to be attacked. And I kind of figured this just kind of meant, or the reason that the Taliban was after them so much was because they were afraid of change. They were in charge, they knew how to run things, they were afraid of educating the young, and that would change. And it also talks about how these students, especially the girls, were taught about their rights, and the rights as humans and as women especially. And I think the Taliban was afraid that they would rise up against them or just kind of break tradition. So they do pretty much almost anything to stop that. I also kind of likened this situation unto the gospel, accepting the gospel, because it talks about how these parents of this girl were in full support of her going to school, and so it's nice for her to go to school, but their peers and neighbors would kind of mock them and say, like, why would you send your child to that? That's so pointless. And I think we kind of get that a lot as members, that this seems like such an outrageous thing for us to do, to follow this, to accept the gospel, but if the right thing, and it's going to better us people. One kind of central theme that I noticed throughout the film was culture. Culture is huge pertaining to education. And so at least for the 2 girls that it showed in Afghanistan and in India, they were kind of like the wives of the home. They came home and did the chores, the cooking, the cleaning, took care of the family, while the boys just kind of did their own thing. They got to play. School was more of a given to the boys. But for the girls, they had to come home, do their chores, or do their chores during the day and go to class at night, and kind of put their studies as the last thing. They would turn to those towards the end of the day when they had time. Whereas in countries that there's more equality and spread out their education more. Like the one boy said, I would come home, work till I was done, and till I was tired, and then do my schoolwork and make somebody else do chores. So culture was a huge part of it. Um, so in Rio, I thought it was interesting how they talked about if this boy didn't receive his education, then he would most likely become a drug dealer and part of a gang. Where in America, if I don't receive my higher education, I probably will just end up being like a McDonald's manager as opposed to a speech pathologist if I want to be. It, I mean, it will, my lifestyle will be slightly different, but it's not nearly as drastic as we used to see. I also thought it was really cool that in Rio they had a monthly stipend for the parents for every child who came to school. I think it's really interesting that they were paying them to send their child to school as opposed to trying to stop it or just not really caring whether there is school or not. One thing that I thought was kind of sad was that a lot of the parents have to provide for their children, so they leave them kind of on their own. So the children have to grow up a lot faster to be able to take care of themselves and their siblings, which would also kind of put a strain on their education. One thing that was kind of in common with the boy in Rio and the girl in India was that the boy in Rio was very advanced, and he learned really quickly, but they wanted to keep him back because they were worried about his maturity with the older children. And for the girl in India, she didn't have the opportunity to further her education as much as the other kids, so she was held back with much younger kids. And for her, it was a hit on her self-confidence. She just didn't feel like going anymore because it's embarrassing, so she dropped out. And with the boy in Rio, it would be frustrating to him because he knows all the material already, so when he has to do his grade over again, he's going to be bored and get frustrated that he has to be there when he's so far ahead that he would just drop out as well. So I think really kind of being able to work with each student is a really fun thing as well. Another thing I found interesting with India was that the women were viewed very much for, you're for the home, this is your job, it doesn't matter if you get an education. The mom kind of talked about how they educated their boys, but what good did that do? So what good is it going to do to educate her daughter? And I think that kind of got into her head, and that's why she kind of gave up. One thing that I did think was really, really neat with these three countries that were kind of in more poverty was that when the students were asked what they wanted to do when they grew up, they all wanted to be a teacher. They all realized the importance of teaching others and spreading this education around the world, and they wanted to help others learn as well, the way that they were taught. And then last, they kind of talked about his boy in Japan, which I think tied it together really well because it was a higher end country. Education was more of a given to him than to these other countries, and he wasn't as hungry for it. The other three countries, it wasn't just something that was expected of them. They had to really work for it, and they really wanted it. But this boy in Japan, it was just kind of, everyone did it, what you're supposed to do, but I'll just do it because I have to, kind of thing. And when they were talking to his mom, she kind of mentioned that to him, school and meals and a place to live is just stuff that he expects in life. And he kind of understands that not all places have that, but not really. So I think that is what is important is to remember that sometimes we're given things and we take it for granted, but we have to realize that not everyone has that, and that's where we need to pull together to come up with an education to help everyone.